This is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is March 3rd, 2025. Before I begin, I wanted to remind my listeners that I will be going live soon. I have had to change the date because of various reasons, but I will be coming to you live stream very soon, within a month. How about that? And the other business is please subscribe to my channel and spread the word. Today, I want to talk about U.S. federal government policy on the Ukraine meeting at the White House. As you know, there was a meeting at the White House between the Ukrainian president Zelensky and President Donald Trump. What I specifically want to talk about is what the mainstream media did not talk about. It makes the policy from the Trump administration right. And as I always tell you, I look at facts and details. I've actually talked about Ukraine before, and I'm just really fascinated what on live TV we can see, and then the analysis from the mainstream media and the publications later on when we all see and hear the same things. So, first thing I want to talk about is my observation. This came straight from that media event at the White House. The Trump administration says, hey, you really hate your enemy. And nobody talked about this. That was something that I didn't realize how much the Ukrainians hate the Russians. And based on that, are unwilling to negotiate. Now, on the surface, you're going to say, well, yeah, of course they hate them. Yes, they do. However, when you are the president of a country, you have to look at where you're at now and look at how you can get the ceasefire, stop the fighting, because that's what the administration was saying. But if you're so blinded by hating them, then you will never settle. And I think that we can look at history and wars in this case and see that. Now, the next one ties in with hating your enemy. Can Ukraine win the war? What is Ukraine's current strategy? Now, this blends with the first one. As you are aware, the problems with Russia go back a long way. And yes, Russia did invade them. What is not being talked about is if Russia had generated to 100% capacity their military, can you tell me if Ukraine would have had any chance at all? Now, that was briefly talked about at that briefing that they had in the White House. Now, that is huge, and nobody on the mainstream media side is talking about it. Why are the Russians taking their time to engage and fight the Ukrainians? Well, a lot of the Ukrainians are actually Russians. I'm sure everybody knew that. It's not talked about by the mainstream media. And again, can the Ukraine currently beat Russia? My opinion is no. They don't have the numbers of fighting people. Now, they are good fighters, and their army, which was just put in place to generate a lot of troops, was when the war started. Again, not being reported. What's their strategy? How are they planning on winning the war? And you're going to notice something too. I've taken the money part out of this part of the podcast. Can any of us say, or the Ukraine, how they're going to beat Russia? Because if you look at a map, they can't do the port. When they invaded, they've got a buffer zone that the Ukrainians would have to take out to even get to Russian territory. And I just don't see from a military strategy how they're planning on winning. And that's when President Trump said, "You've got a bad hand." Okay, maybe he could have explained that, and I'm explaining it now. Strategy wise, they don't have a strategy to beat Russia. And the war could go on for 10 years because apparently the Russians taking their time. Look at how the Russians staffed their military force that invaded. It wasn't their elite troops that they sent in. They sent in the equivalent, in my opinion, Air National Guard people that they forced to go and fight. And remember something else too. The Russians, that port city, they've been there since 2014. And strategically, the Russians attacked a nuclear power plant. The Ukrainians can't export any type of agricultural stuff. When we talked about this almost 8 months ago, Ukrainians have great resources, and I reminded people that the mainstream media wasn't reporting why Russia really wanted the Ukraine. Now let's pivot to the mineral deal. It was a new strategy that could change how wars are financed. Again, no strategist in the mainstream media is really looking at why the Trump administration wanted to try this approach. Now, the Trump administration didn't say that they didn't agree with the Ukraine on how the war started and why. Okay? The mainstream media tried to come across like the Trump administration was acting like they didn't care. They do care. This is a new strategy. Imagine this. If they would have signed the mineral deal, here's what would have happened. The Ukrainians would have been able to start selling it and using the money to pay their troops, paying their federal employees, to include their diplomats, and not only pay back the United States, but pay other partners. Then they could have financed a war that could last 5 years. we, the world, have always given countries money to fight the war, as well we should have. But this idea of them financing it themselves is a brilliant idea, because it was a strategy of the Russians to bankrupt Ukraine so that they would have to give up. And the Trump administration was giving them the ability to earn some money, and then they could do whatever they want. Now, there were phases that the Trump administration were trying to get to get the war ended. But the strategy itself was missed by the mainstream media and wasn't conveyed by anyone that this was just something that would have transformed how wars are financed. The Ukrainian war is horrible. No one will say that the Ukrainians did not try to fight their way to repel the Russians. Unfortunately for President Zelensky, great leader, he was dealt a horrible hand. And that horrible hand started when he won the election. When he won the election 5-6 years ago, that's when the Russians knew that they were going to invade. Why do I say that? If the other candidate would have won, they were going to align themselves more with Russia. And we see what happens now. Mainstream media did not report that. The Ukrainians in Europe need to look at their current positions and maybe use transformative policy thinking to quit following the same blueprints. And what I really mean is, and you can check this out, look at the last 3 or 4 wars that the United States and Europe have been involved in. And we want to help. But it's not really about the money with this one. It's about being a leader in your country. And they said this during the press briefing. See where you're at. What are you leading the Ukrainian people into? If your position is you want guarantees and following the same old format of waging war, you have to have the ability of your leadership to take suggestions that are new ideas and trust that the United States wants to work with you. This is Just Listen, hosted by George. Please post some responses to this podcast, right? And the question is, should Zelensky have followed our advice with the mineral deal and signed it? Have a great day.